What's up, guys? I'm going to take you through a full lower body session incorporating some flexibility, some strength, a little bit of hand balancing, and just so you guys get some insights in how I like to train. So I'm going to take you through all the way from the start to the finish, maybe talk through some things, give you my reasoning for how I approach different skills that I train for and how I structure a training session. So let's get right into it. So immediately, right when I walk into the gym, the first thing I do to start my warm-up is give my body a little bit of what it needs. And for me, I tend to carry a lot of my resting tension near the lumbar spine, especially near the low back. So QLs, spinal erectors, even the lats get very tight and they pull the pelvis anteriorly and restricts my hips from moving. So here I'm just starting with a respiratory lat stretch, one of my favorite exercises to do at high frequency, just focusing on breathing here. Inhale through the nose, full exhale through the mouth, about 6 to 8 breaths here, each side, keeping that posterior pelvic tilt. Okay, then I'll go into an exercise I call the deep squat hip shifts. So I get into a very narrow stance squat, and this is going to allow my whole entire spine to round. Now the key here is in this position, pulling the knees forward as I shoot my rib cage back. And now I'm just shifting one knee forward beyond the other knee. And then as I shift, say, my left knee forward, I feel a huge stretch in my QLs on the opposite side. So here I'm just shifting back and forth, maybe 10 to 15 reps a side, just whenever my arms get tired, honestly. And after a few of those reps, I'll just let the knees fall out. This just stretches the obliques and the QL just a bit more. Just kind of hanging out here, giving the body what it needs. You know, with all the hand balancing I'm doing, the QLs and obliques just get really tight and sore from all the side bending work I'm doing. So again, the idea with this is just to get into a parasympathetic state and release some tension in the low back. Okay, so the last part of my general warm-up, and something I do basically every day, whether it's an upper body session, a rest day, or lower body session, is just sit into the bottom position of my squat, see how the hips are feeling on the day. I'll go through a series of movements, which I'll take you through. And the goal of this isn't to improve any range of motion, it's just to feel a little bit better in the hips and more open in the bottom of my squat. Now, this is only something I was able to do after I unlocked the squat. If you are not at a point where you could sit in the bottom position to squat, then don't waste time with this. I'm just using this as a base position just to kind of maintain it and assess how the hips are feeling. So I'll push the knees out a bit. And again, I'm not doing this to improve range of motion, so just maybe 5 to 10 reps here. Okay, I'll do a little bit of these thoracic rotations. I like to hold on to this part of the rubber floor here to just wedge myself deeper into the squat. This kind of routine is adopted from the Ido Portal squat routine back in the day. Seeing Ido go through this so smoothly was what got me interested in movement in the first place. Okay, then I'll kind of put my hands down, just kind of move through some internal rotation there. Bit of adduction at the hip. Nice for kind of stretching the TFL a little bit as well. I'll get low. Stretch the quads, the rec fem. Really squeeze the glutes as I dip the knee toward the ground. This is a nice one, though it's not improving hip flexion, but the rectus femoris, when it gets really tight, it pulls the pelvis forward, and it can restrict hip flexion and internal rotation. So a lot of my clients who have internal rotation deficits, I like to go after those quads initially. And if there's a lot of pain with internal rotation, then maybe we're doing a lot of work to improve that hip extension first before attacking internal rotation. Okay, so after that, get back into the squat. Ooh, feels nice. Maybe do a few kind of lateral pikes to squat, stretch a little bit of that hip capsule. Okay, now I only do this if I have time for it. It's a weekend. I want to get a little bit of extra joint prep in. Other times I'll just go straight into my specific warm-up. As I'm doing this, sip on some pre-workout. I don't always take it, maybe a few days a week. This one is from Equip Foods. They have a little clean pre-workout. 200 milligrams of caffeine in it though. I'm pretty sensitive to caffeine, so if I do drink this after 1 p.m., my sleep is screwed. But yeah, if you guys want to try this, it's nice. I mix it with a little bit of electrolytes. It's getting really hot. It's about 90 degrees today, Southern California. But yeah, whether pre-workouts work or not, it's just a delicious, sweet beverage to sip on. That's refreshing. I'm just going to talk with my butt to the camera, so don't mind me. But I'm just going to go through some lateral leg swings. Now the thing with this is just to let the torso, the pelvis, the whole spine do whatever it wants to do. Let the femurs do whatever they want to do. I'm not trying to stay in any internal rotation of the foot. As I go all the way out, my foot turns up. Totally fine. Bring it all the way across, bring it all the way up. Just moving through some speed here. Over time, going a little bit higher. Other side. I never liked leg swings, especially because my hips used to really pop a lot during them. But now they feel quite good. Nice little ballistic stretch through the hamstrings and groin. Okay, then I just go through a little passive pigeon pose. Again, no intensity with this, no loaded holds, no loaded good mornings. I'm just opening up the glutes a bit. Hip rotation's not a big focus for me right now in my phase currently. So I'm not trying to train the hip rotation, because if you're really pushing your splits, your front splits and middle splits, you're gonna wanna put your hip rotation work just kind of on maintenance, because those hip rotators are firing a lot in some of those deep end range, splits, stretches, and it can lead to a lot of overuse. So just, 30 seconds there with some elevation. I'm staying out of any sort of deep ranges with this. My glutes surprisingly get really sore when I do a lot of straddle handstand work. Just really squeezing the glutes to pull out the legs in the straddle. And I'm doing that 5 days a week, so it's nice to get just a little bit of passive pigeon work here. I would say a few months ago, I was doing a lot of loaded pigeon work, as well as really pushing intensity in my middle split. And I started getting some lateral hip pain, and you think it's like, is the labrum acting up on me? Is it arthritis? But it was just me doing too much at once. And I don't know what the root of it was. Was it the fact that I was training my hip rotation? Or was it the fact that I was just pushing my middle split way too hard and forcing progression when I wasn't ready for it? And that was just causing, my hip rotators to work way too hard in that end range position, instead of staying in a range that I can kind of handle and work isometrically up from there. Okay, so after that, I'll do a little bit of child's pose, active hip extension raises. So put that block under the front leg, bring this leg into flexion so I can keep that pelvis posteriorly tilted. Forearms down. Already getting a cramp in my toes, jeez. All right, here we go. Okay, I'm really trying to keep this knee straight, but my hip flexors aren't really warmed up right now, so my hip extension looks pretty crappy. The goal with this end range stuff is to hardly get the foot off the ground. Okay, if I'm going there, you're really not working at your end range. 6 to 8 reps, couple second hold. This side might look a little bit better. I have better hip flexion on this left leg, So that means I'm not going to be in as much of a posterior pelvic tilt because there's more genuine hip flexion on this leg, so it makes the hip extension look easier. But that doesn't actually mean hip extension's better on this leg. Okay, get into a little pancake position. Just kind of, again, some ballistic pulses. Stretch out those obliques. But what I really want to do here is just some straddle compression lifts. I hate these. Some of my clients complain, like, oh, why don't these ever get any easier? They just don't, so stop complaining about it. Okay, I'm not just trying to lift up here, I'm trying to lift up and out. Yeah, I know it's too high, so I'll lean forward. 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15. Okay, no real holds with that, just high reps. Okay, last one in this 5 exercise sequence. I recently made a post about this drill. I've been using it for a long time, and I really like to give it to clients, and I teach this one in my workshops as well. But it's a wall-referenced kettlebell hip flexor lift. So with this one, we're using the wall as external support to anchor in the pelvis, especially that posterior pelvic tilt. So we want to keep that low back crushed into the box the entire time. If we want to make it harder on this front leg, we can bridge the hips up slightly, okay? So I'm just gently going through hip extension and just pulsing in hip flexion. So the goal isn't to really feel a huge stretch in the front of the hip with this. If anything, we're trying to keep the abs a little bit more engaged. This is one of those drills where if you always feel like you have stiff hip flexors, then oftentimes it's an inability to coordinate the muscles that oppose the motion of the hip flexors with contraction of the hip flexors. So using the low abs in conjunction with the hip flexors to stabilize that pelvis. And high repetitions, low weight here, just getting a little bit of a pump. And every single time when I come out of this one and I walk around, the front of the hip just feels so much looser, and my stride just feels much more comfortable. And I go through a few different variations and different strategies to accomplish the same thing in some of my workshops. So if anyone wants to make a trip to Europe in the next few months, you can join in some of these workshops. They're a fun time. Okay, so after this one, yeah, walk around. Feels so good. So if you have some anterior hip pain, hip impingement, pelvic issues, this drill, money. Okay, so I go through this 2 to 3 rounds. I'll do that on my own. You don't need to see that. And then we'll get into the more loaded flexibility work. Okay, specific warm-up is finished, all 3 rounds. Pre-workout drink is finished as well. Got the tingly fingers going on from the beta-alanine. Feeling ready to go. So again, the whole idea with that, just to continue on from the general warm-up, touch on some areas that aren't necessarily the biggest focus. Like say I wanted to work on my hip rotation a bit, but not actually train it hard, just to continue getting the joints feeling good and prepared for the more loaded work to follow. So now we're going through a superset of single leg Jefferson curls with a little bit of a cross-body focus. And we're pairing that with a barbell long lunge that I'll take you through. So this is more loaded flexibility work specific to the front splits, which today is more of my focus. I have another flexibility day, which is more middle split focused, so I'm doing actual middle split isometrics. But I'm still going to touch on a little bit of adductor work as well after this with some wall kettlebell middle splits. So I have one day of actual specific middle split isometrics, and then one day where I just do the wall kettlebell splits to actually get a more dynamic strengthening effect through full range in the adductors and help support the development of middle splits. So let's get into it. I do a foot elevated or toes elevated variation of this to get full stretch into the posterior chain and sciatic nerve. So I add a little bit of a hip shift. So I'm just going to show you guys the first set again. I'm going to go through 3 sets of this. So the idea here, pull this opposing knee down, which turns my pelvis to the working side. Keep this knee locked. And I'm bringing the kettlebell, taking 20 kilograms for a ride here, to the opposite side of the box. So I'm using the corner of the box. Really pull this opposite knee down. As soon as that knee stops moving down, range is over, pressing my toes into the kettlebell, segmenting my spine on the way back up. Making sure my pelvis isn't rotating away. I'm keeping this hip a little bit outside of the foot there, leaning my weight forward. So I'm just going through 5 slow reps here. As soon as I get to the bottom, I'm really squeezing my quads, pulling myself deeper. Again, no ego with loaded flexibility work. Okay, I shouldn't even be talking during this, but it's relatively easy enough for me right now. Okay, this is the difference between full range of motion strength training and actual flexibility work to expand that range. Is you're spending time there. Okay, last rep here, really sink into that hip capsule. Ah, nice. So hamstrings for me tends to warm up very fast. Hip flexors take a little bit more love, which is why I don't really touch on the hamstrings too much in the warm-up. It's more adductor focus. Remember, the adductors play a role in the front split as well because they are hip flexors, so we still want to warm them up. Okay, other side. Biggest mistake I see with this one is people overly rotate this hand, and then this pelvis moves inside of the foot. It's like this. Probably can't see it from this angle, but it's totally defeating the purpose of the hip shift. If anything, we want to just think about this knee being pulled down toward the ground, which turns the belly button slightly to this working side leg. This is probably one of my favorite Jefferson curl variations. Feels fantastic on my hips. Loosens the hip capsule, lengthens the lateral portion of the hamstrings, sciatic nerve. Okay. Just because it's lengthening the sciatic nerve doesn't mean it's good. For somebody with acute back pain and sciatica symptoms, okay? Maybe something to work on later when nerve symptoms die down. Okay, so 3 sets, 5 reps. That's set 1. Now let's head over to the barbell long lunge. Hey, kneeling barbell long lunge. This exercise is a wild time. Now, I realize some of these setups are a bit excessive, especially if you train at a normal commercial gym. I rent this gym space so nobody's in here, so I have kettlebells and boxes all around. The place is a mess, but if you need to do these exercises just one at a time, totally fine. All right, so with this one, I got 10 pounds, 5 kilograms on each side. I could easily load this a little bit heavier, 25, 35 pounds each side, but the goal isn't maximum weight, okay? Like in the past, I've built up to pretty heavy weight here in order to get me into my deepest lunge, but now I'm kind of working more on using as little weight as I can and trying to use my glutes to push me into a deeper range. So I have a kettlebell here to prop my foot up so I can get nice and long with this front leg, kind of specific to a front split, and just keep it bent. And then I have a little bit of a pad for my back knee, so just lunge out, squeeze the glutes, and back. So we're not really going full range here. It's more of a kind of a pulse style in-end range. Once I get there, I'm really squeezing my glute, pulling my elbows down to engage the lats and the low back. about 10 reps, a little bit of a hold. People always want to know how I dismount from this. It's always ugly. Not ideal. These shoes suck for this. Super flimsy. Okay. Racket. Move the kettlebell to the other side. Okay, this right hip has been giving me a little bit of issues over the past few weeks. Just a little bit of anterior hip pain. Much better right now. The funny thing about hip pain, don't ever take imaging for face value. My left hip has virtually zero pain, and it had the worst labral tear on imaging. And right hip, tends to flare up a little bit more. So here we go. And with this one, I'm trying not to let my ribs flare excessively here and use a ton of low back. So even at this bottom range, I'm trying to not only squeeze my glutes, but squeeze my abs, try to keep my ribs down. Again, there's a time and place for back bending with hip extension, but not right now. Okay, now we're heading into front splits. So typically, I do front splits twice a week. Today is going to just be more lower intensity, contract, relax style. My session earlier in the week is a bit more intense. I'm holding some weights and shorter duration holds and really trying to focus on getting as deep as possible and creating some real strength there. Today is more of just contract, relax, see where the body wants to go, not forcing anything. About 30 to 60 seconds here. Just as soon as my body stops wanting to go deeper, I cut the set. Typically with front splits, you're not going to see me holding anything above 60 seconds. Splits in general, intensity is key. So I would prefer more sets, shorter duration holds, over 1 or 2 sets of long 2 to 5 minute holds. Your body just starts to freak out and you end up just holding yourself out of the range instead of allowing the body to yield for a good 30 to 60 seconds where you can really focus there. There's a B in here. Hopefully it doesn't screw up my concentration. Okay, so first set, getting into it, starting with the right leg back. Inhale, fully exhale. And I'm just going to start my contractions at that first kind of barrier of resistance. So contract, relax. It's not just squeezing the ground together, squeezing the stretched muscles. We can do that. I just did that. But we could do other things like rotation. Squeeze, squeeze, squeeze. Relax, go deeper. I'm rotating the other way. Back bend, contract. Forward flex. Call this the 4 corners contract, relax. Okay. So maybe 1 cycle of each of those directions. I'm doing 3 sets of this total today. Start of a 4-week block, so I'm not going to kill myself with volume. Some days I'm doing 4 sets, some days I'm doing 5 sets. Probably within this 4 weeks, I'm going to do build up sets weekly. So 4 sets next week, 5 sets the following week, and then probably deload there and maybe go back to 3. Okay, back into it. Okay, shimmy back, get upright, and slide in it. So with the contractions, I like to time my breath. So as I squeeze the ground together, inhale through the nose, full exhale. See if I can move a bit deeper. Remember, stretching is a skill. It's not about just creating strength at end range. But can you tolerate these end range positions? Okay, there's stretch tolerance. It's more of a nervous system change over time, and then you have the biological changes where you're actually building longer fascicles, and that's the changes that take a long period of time. But you can't have neurological changes without biological changes, and vice versa. So they go hand in hand. Welcome to the other side of the gym. Got some wall space, really nice wood wall here. And I wore my slippery socks, so there's no friction on this wall. Now, you can do these kettlebell wall splits in free space if you don't have a wall, but I like the stability of the wall. You can actually relax on it. Your hip flexors aren't firing excessively to kind of stabilize the pelvis. So I think it's a nice way to train your adductor flexibility. So the goal with this phase for me, and in general with all of my more isolated loaded flexibility work, it's not to increase weight. It's not to lift the heaviest amount of weight I can possible at my end ranges of motion. There are times and places for that in your flexibility training, especially when you're really trying to build a new range of motion and you're stiff. You're going to need heavy weight to get you into lower ranges. But for me right now, I'm trying to see how little weight I can use for my loaded flexibility training to get me to a similar place that I would, in the past where I needed heavier weight. So, in phases where I'm really trying to push new ranges of motion, maybe I'm working up to 16 kilogram kettlebells or 20 kilogram kettlebells, that's 40 pounds each foot, doing heavy eccentrics with them. But right now, I'm just, I'm going to do 3 sets of about 10 repetitions of dynamic reps. I'm just using 8 kilograms, okay? So it's not like it's extremely taxing the adductors. If anything, I'm trying to use my glutes and my hip flexors to pull me into my deepest straddle. And the weight is just there for a little bit of assistance. So here we go. Let's strap up. Get into the straddle first. Just so you guys can see the setup. Okay, so I'm going to slowly lower. First few reps are always a bit stiff. Now once I get to my end point, I'm going to lock my knees, squeeze my glutes as if I'm trying to hip thrust up, and then back up. Okay, so I might even take my hands, press them into the side of the legs there, just to get those glutes firing. What I really like about the wall split, or just the kettlebell split in general, is you don't have to worry about keeping your feet on the ground or keeping your toes forward. The feet could just do whatever they want to do here. So you're really not taxing your hip rotators. It's just purely all in the adductors, training that horizontal abduction. Okay, I'm going a little bit too fast, but I want to really make sure I'm using the shortening side muscles. So again, before I was using maybe 16 kilograms to get to a similar depth, and now I need half that weight to get there. Something that tends to happen due to gravity pushing downwards is people lose that anterior pelvic tilt. So they'll tuck the pelvis under at the bottom here. So at the bottom, as you're squeezing the hip flexors, really think about anteriorly tilting that pelvis, keeping that lumbar lordosis. Okay, that should be about 10. I wasn't really counting. I'm going to do fly, just went in my eye. Jesus. I'm going to do 2 more sets of that, and then I'm going to go a little bit heavier. I'm going to use 30 pounds and just do some static holds. So this is similar to how after the Jefferson curls and the barbell long lunges, I did some static contract relax. with front splits. This is kind of similar, but I'm not using the actual middle split. I'm just doing it with the kettlebell wall split. In between these sets, I'm warming up my wrist because I'm going to do some handstands in between the static holds with the wall split. So just stretching out the finger flexors, wrist flexors. I've been hand balancing 5 days a week recently, and yeah, the wrists get pretty sore, so always want to go through a nice warm up prior. I'll stretch them with the fingers forward, fingers facing in to get the ulnar side of the wrist, and then I'll stretch my big meaty thumbs. So very similar to ankle mobility. Like if you really want to improve your dorsiflexion, you got to stretch the toes. Same with the wrist. If any of you got any wrist issues, got to stretch the fingers if you want to improve your wrist mobility. Just going to do some static, kind of 30 to 45 second, short duration contract, relax. So the contraction is just going to be squeezing my glutes as hard as I can and then trying to relax, go a little bit lower. Okay, so these are 30 pounds each foot. Slowly lower this down. Okay, so I'll start here. Push, push, push. I'm also going to do a contraction where I try to internally rotate from my toes, pushing on the top part of the kettlebell handle. Relax, going deeper. Just a couple cycles of this. That's good. Use hand support on the way back up. Ideally, if I really wanted a nice relaxing dismount, there would be a way to just kind of self-release these kettlebells so I don't have to really contract the adductors so much to come back up, but it is what it is. So 3 to 5 rounds of this. I'm going to treat it like the front split. Probably do 3 rounds this week and then increase rounds weekly and then deload back to 3. Flexibility work done, hand balancing's done. Had a nice little 25-second PR, one handstand on the left side there. Pretty stoked about that. All right, so while I warm up a bit, I'll just chat to you guys about a few things, but I'm going to be warming up for some paused 2-second at the bottom front squats. So just kind of warming up, front rack position right now. It's already pretty loose since I just did some handstands. Wrists are warmed up. A lot of people think the front rack, it's tight lats or tight thoracic spine restricting. And yes, thoracic spine, but predominantly it's, external rotation at the shoulder, because I don't want to crush this microphone. If we're limited in external rotation, then what's going to happen is the elbows are going to come outside of the wrists, and then the thorax is going to flex in response to that. Okay, so yes, we want thoracic extension, but we also want the ability to keep the elbows in relative to the hands, and that's external rotation. Okay, we're not even in full shoulder flexion, so we can't really say it's tight lats causing this. If you are restricted in your front rack and you're limited in external rotation, get on the Supple Shoulders program, link in the bio, and fix it. All right, so let's do a few warm-ups. Keep the elbows high. And yes, I got the weightlifting shoes, my old position weightlifting shoes from my Olympic weightlifting days, back when I really couldn't even squat at all because my flexibility was so terrible. But you know what? I want to use them for squatting. I don't need them. I don't like the shoes I'm wearing today for squatting. They're too flimsy. So I want to be able to keep a very upright torso since I'm doing some pause front squats. And I don't want to overly tax my wrist since the wrists are getting a little bit sore. So I'm going to warm up a bit. Okay, I'm going to ramp up to some heavier working sets, 3 to 4 reps, 5 sets. Probably not a ton heavier than this. so something around 175 pounds. This whole phase I was doing front box squats, so I'm not going full range. And I prefer partial range strength training work when you're doing a lot of loaded flexibility work, because that loaded flexibility is end range strength training. Okay, so you're getting a somewhat of a hypertrophy stimulus by doing some of that stuff. So if you're doing a whole bunch of full range of motion strength training, so if I was doing a lot of front squats, pausing in that stretch position, you know, it could start to tap into some of your recovery of your connective tissue, because if you're constantly hitting the end ranges of your connective tissue, then that stuff's not going to recover. So if you're doing a lot of loaded flexibility work, then maybe you want to do some partial range strength work to supplement that. If you're not doing a ton of flexibility work, then of course it's way more bang for your buck to take all of your strength exercises through their full range, so you can get a little bit flexibility benefits in there, but then also the hypertrophy benefits that come from full range training to that stretched position of the muscle. I'm going to take this mic off just because it might get crushed by the bar. Elbows up, chest up. 1, 2. All right, so we're going for somewhere around RPE 7. So out of a scale of 10, 7 is kind of like, this is relatively hard, but I'm still nowhere close to failure. Maybe like 3-4 reps shy of failure. So I'm going to add some weight here. Probably go up 10 pounds each side. And yeah, let's do the first set here. We got 3 reps. And you know what? My strength training for my legs is very minimal nowadays, because I've always had bigger legs, bigger quads, bigger glutes from my years of playing soccer. So it's relatively easy for me to put on size in my legs if I want to, but building flexibility never came easy for me. So it's kind of a shot to the ego seeing your strength drop. You know, there was a point where I was doing, you know, almost close to double body weight front squats. I think I had a 320-pound front squat. Of course, form was a little bit ugly because of my mobility limitations, but you know, there's a point where you need to ask yourself, how strong is strong enough? You know, at what point is more strength not supporting your overall goal anymore? And for me, it's to move better. You know, it's to not be restricted in my day-to-day life and in my training. You know, if I'm doing a lot of calisthenics, gymnastics training, I want to be able to express my full mobility. I need middle splits. I need front splits. I want to be able to achieve these big ranges of motion. And, you know, squatting and deadlifting, it has a ton of benefits for the body hormonally and structurally. But, you know, I feel like for me, a base layer of strength is enough just to keep the body, the connective tissues healthy, to support your flexibility training. But I don't think I need to be at a point where I was years ago, you know, when I was more into my athletic stage, more about explosive power development. That being said, I always have my clients training some form of lower body strength in their programming, because I never, even if your goal is purely flexibility like myself, you know, if you build flexibility right, you'll be able to maintain it, so might as well prioritize it. But I do find if I take out strength completely, then I pick up a lot of connective tissue injuries just because that stuff just loses capacity. Heavy, slow resistance training is probably one of the best things you could do to build up your tendons and your ligaments. So keep your tendons healthy, do some heavy, slow resistance training. All right, set 1 going down. I'm not gonna lie, that felt pretty easy. Probably go up again. Now, this is the first week that I'm getting back into full range squatting, like I was saying before. So it's just about finding the weight that is around that RPE7. It's challenging, but you know, I can still maintain quality reps, nothing grinding, okay? Because, you know, the research with failure, it's like you don't have to go to failure, especially for strength gains, okay? You want more technical efficiency with strength. So as a means of progressive overload, I don't have to just keep, you know, putting weight on the bar week by week, set by set. Let's make this weight that was relatively challenging week 1, let's make it prettier. Let's have cleaner reps week by week. I think people get lost in this progressive overload. It's like we need to add weight weekly. But what is progressive overload? People think it's like a proactive thing, like I have to go in and add weight so I can make progress. But it's actually a reactive thing where the work you've done leading up to that session to where you feel like you can add weight, that's where the progressive overload already happened. And then the ability to add weight is a result of the work you did previously. So it's a reactive thing, right? You're able to add weight because of the quality work you did with submaximal weight prior. And I think that's a more powerful form of progressive overload. You can't force progress, okay? And this is the same with flexibility work. You know, people want to go deeper into a range of motion weekly. And I've done that in the past, and that's where I plateaued and had injuries. So go to the same depth in your splits or your loaded stretching and see if you could tolerate that stretch position better and better week by week. Build up time under tension isometrically. And then your body will just grant you that new range eventually. I don't know when, but say you're doing a 12 to 24 week cycle, I guarantee you if you take a very gradual, slow approach, by the end of that 12 or 24 weeks, your body will be able to express deeper levels of flexibility, given that you weren't forcing it week by week. Okay? Set 2, going down. Felt decent. I'll probably stay here for now. Okay, I could probably increase weight next week. The start of a cycle. And I deliberately want the first 2 weeks to be easy. And then the last 2 to 3 weeks are going to be heavier. So that's when I will strategically add weight so that only a couple weeks in the cycle are heavy. And then the first few weeks are just easy. You're going for technical efficiency. You're increasing motor units, you're focusing on speed. Okay, so that's one way to strategically add weight. But once you're at a point where it's very challenging, just stay there and focus on maybe getting a little bit more reps, make the lift less grindy, focus on speed. Okay, so that's my rant with progressive overload. Get a little cotton mouth. I need to take a drink. It's hot out, and I'm going to finish out these sets. I got 3 more, and then we're getting into some Nordic hamstring curls. So 180 pounds on the bar, not very much. 2-second pause. In terms of squat stance, I typically go hip width, okay, a little bit of foot turnout. You know, squat stance, it's going to be different for everyone, so don't worry about it. You know, a lot of people, they see people like Kelly Starrett or people who compete in Olympic lifting. They have these perfectly feet pointed forward, and they're able to squat, and it's just like, that's not you. And if you have any hip, morphology changes, like you're going to need to squat with a feet turned out stance. That doesn't mean we're actively shoving the knees out as much as you can to the point where you're coming off the lateral edge of the feet. No, like you're still allowing the knees to go where they want to. I actually like the knees out cue somewhat. A lot of people are hating on that in social media. I've never heard anybody cue somebody to drive their knees out so much that they're literally coming off the inner edge of the foot, and they're not placing contacts through the entire tripod of the foot. I've just never seen that. You know, you'll hear that in a rehab perspective where you see people squatting like completely valgus, and then, you know, the therapist might say, okay, let's add a band around the knees, let's teach you to keep your knees out a bit. But it's never to like force anything past neutral. So I do think people are overly complaining about a cue that isn't really used in a performance setting. I mean, if you look at elite powerlifters and strongmen, look at them powerlift squat, you know, they're kind of driving their knees out. Like it's used as a brace, right? Like just because the glutes stretch fully in internal rotation and flexion doesn't mean you're not, you know, getting the full access of that muscle, because whatever you have to do to lift the most weight, that's what's going to cause the adaptation there. Okay, it's not about going full range in every plane of muscle the muscle goes through, right? Like the squat is a sagittal plane exercise. It's not a frontal and transverse plane exercise, even though there's frontal and transverse plane components to it. Okay, so I want to stretch the hip through hip flexion. Okay, so whatever allows me to get comfortable in the bottom position, I'm going to do that. So maybe slackening the transverse plane in the glutes by bringing the knees out and not focusing on internal rotation is going to allow me to get deeper into flexion, because it reduces the internal rotation demands, and then I can get more out of my glute and adductor magnus as I come up from the bottom. So that's my thought process with squat stance. And if you were curious on that debate, what I thought of it, there's my answer. All right, last set, best set. Leave a comment below. Let me know what you think of the mustache. I think it looks tremendous during squatting when I'm making that face. But hey, your opinion matters too. So here we go. Last set, best set. 3 reps there. Maybe next week, hit 4 reps. Week after that, all sets at 4 reps. Call me out. Am I doing a full 2-second pause? I'm counting in my head, so I'm not perfect. Let me know in the comments. Okay, Nordic curl time. So I got my makeshift setup here with pads. The key with Nordic curls is to make sure the shin angle is completely parallel to the ground. So a lot of times people set up with too much knee flexion, so the knees are completely on the ground, and it already places you in a disadvantageous position to do the movement. So if I hook my legs in here with this elevated pad, it now makes sure that my knees are directly across from the feet, and my shin angle here is directly parallel with the ground. Okay, if I was to go here, and then my feet were anchored up like that, now I'm setting up into too much knee flexion. I don't know if you could see that on camera. Before I get into these, I just wanted to address something that I wanted to bring up earlier. Is people ask all the time, like, why do I train my flexibility before my strength and my hypertrophy work? And the answer is very simple. It's you're going to get better faster at what you prioritize. And then people are like, well, you know, but the research shows that if you do your flexibility work before your strength training, it opens you up for injury, and it's going to limit your force production. And I think the injury part is a bunch of crap. Like, all you have to do is just warm up properly for your strength training, and then all of that stuff goes out the window. A lot of the studies on flexibility before, you know, athletic performance, they'll do like a 5-minute long supine hamstring stretch, and then immediately after have the study participants go on a full sprint. Of course, the sprint isn't going to be fully primed by doing a 5-minute hamstring stretch. The nervous system potentiation is completely different. One, you're doing your full, you know, parasympathetic nervous system going straight into sympathetic. So do your flexibility work and do your strength training work. It doesn't matter when you do them. And if there is some force production loss with your strength training, I guarantee for most people who need to train their flexibility, that loss in force production is kind of offset by better positioning. So if I do my flexibility work and my squat feels much looser afterwards, for me, I'll take the 5 to 10% decrease in force production for better positioning and for better improvements in my flexibility long term, since I prioritized it first. So that's my thought process there. And honestly, I haven't really experienced any injuries doing so, and I haven't experienced a ton of force production loss. The only reason I feel weaker with my squats after I do all my splits is because, those muscles are taxed. They're pre-fatigued before. My adductors, my hamstrings, I worked them hard through their end range, so of course they're going to be tired. I didn't do any just passive, relaxed stuff. It was very sympathetic dominant, so it's more of the fact that I'm tired and I'm not as focused for my strength training, but that's okay because it's not my biggest focus. If I wanted to put, 50 to 100 pounds back on my squat, then I would start with my squats and I'd put my flexibility work on maintenance, but lower body strength, it's maintenance for me right now. Anyways, Nordic curls. So what I'm doing with these, they're on maintenance. I'm accumulating high volume, so 3 sets, 8 to 12 reps. I start with maybe 1 or 2 free ones just to tell myself that I still have them, and then I'll use some stick assist for the remaining portions of the reps. So here is a couple reps of free Nordic curls. I'll do one more. Obviously piking the hips a bit, so kind of cheating, but I still count it. So I'll do about 5 reps assisted, keeping constant tension in the muscle. I can even emphasize a posterior tilt. All right, that'll do it. Okay guys, that is the session. So with the filming, the session took me a little bit longer than I would like, 3 hours. But, typically the session lasts anywhere from 2 to 2.5 hours. The hand balancing sometimes makes it a little bit longer. And if your goals don't include handstands and anything skill related, then this session should be doable for most people. I typically like clients training anywhere from 60 to 120 minutes, just depending on how many goals they have. If it's just flexibility and strength, we can get that all done in an hour session. If you're wanting to train more for splits, then we're looking more at the 90 to 120 minute mark, just because that stuff is very neurologically taxing and you need rest. So we unpacked a lot in this video. So if you stayed for the whole thing, then mad respect to you, and thank you so much for valuing the information I have to put out there. Like always, hit the like button, ask me anything in the comments section, we can have a conversation, and please subscribe to the channel. And if you want more guidance on programming, then reach out to me. I'm taking on some one-on-one clients still, and I'd be happy to work with you.